The original souls that came to Earth came from outside of Earth to incarnate. And then many of them stayed and continued to incarnate over and over and over, sort of ad nauseum, on Earth. So that's the original soul group. There are souls at times that come to Earth to aid humanity's evolution. They don't regularly come to Earth. The only reason they come to Earth is they come from advanced cultures in the universe. There's a third type of soul that at times comes to Earth, and that's an angelic soul. That's a soul that comes from the angelic realm that supports Source or works directly with Source and the archangels. And those at times are my clients, angelic realm souls. They're fascinating people.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Dr. Linda Backman with us on the show today. Linda's a licensed psychologist and regression therapist. Now, most of us understand the concept of reincarnation, but not necessarily how past life details can help heal physical and emotional conditions. You know I'm going to be asking her about all of that. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go chat with Linda. Linda, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you join us today. Thanks for making the time for us.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wow, my pleasure's all mine. What's soul regression?
What is soul regression? Wow. Okay. Small question, big answer. Soul regression. So people understand, soul regression includes regression to understanding past lives, obviously for the client. And then at the end of the past life, we follow that natural journey during the regression. We follow that natural process that happens when we pass, when we complete every life, that slice of our soul that resides within our body. It basically functions on autopilot. The client experiences that slice of soul basically elevating and returning to their higher self. And then we work at the higher self level of the client.
Okay, can we distill that down to about a first grade level?
Sure.
Well, first of all, we all live a lot of past lives. Some people don't believe that. I know it for a fact because I've seen many of them with my clients and with myself. So can you start there? Do we live lots of past lives when you say higher self and when you say a sliver of the soul remains? Can you explain all of that to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely I can. That's why when, you said what a soul regression is like, in my head, I was like, okay, Linda, well, small answer, big answer. Okay. Okay, maybe the most basic thing to start with, Julie, is that as a soul and as a soul in the greater spiritual realm, we are required to grow and learn. We're required to evolve. We're required to gain skills. So it's kind of like in most states in the United States, most countries in the world, children need to go to school to be, quote unquote, educated. So we as a soul learn and grow primarily in body, primarily incarnate, not primarily when we're pure soul and not incarnate. Okay, so that's a very oversimplified way of explaining why do we live one life to the next. We're growing and learning. We trip and fall. I mean, we might do that literally, but that's not what I mean. We have free will when we come to Earth. So we sometimes don't make the best choices because we're fallible as humans in our human brain. So as probably most people know, we get the opportunity to come back or even within a lifetime, clean up some choice we made, small or large, whatever it might have been. We can clean it up within a lifetime, balancing karma, or we might clean it up, 50 years later in another life, 2,000 or 3,000 years later in another life. So that's reincarnation.
Okay. And does everybody reincarnate? And is there like a set number that everybody reincarnates? Like how many lives? Like, okay, everybody reincarnates 5,012 lives, or is that all part of what that spirit decides in each lifetime?
Yeah, great question. So let me start. Maybe this probably I should have prefaced it in the beginning. I've been guiding regression for 28, 29 years. And that's when I'm saying what I sound like I know, it comes from that many years of client after client after client. So it's a little bit complicated. And so just to make it simple, most souls that incarnate on Earth are souls that were designed to come to Earth to grow and evolve. And I can, broaden that explanation when we get there in our conversation. So most souls that incarnate primarily on Earth as they evolve, and let's just say, so I always like to make things kind of black and white. Everybody that's listening, think about soul evolution on a 10-point scale. We all were young souls. We all were at the stage of 1 or the stage of kindergarten of learning as a soul. As we evolve, and if we get beyond, if we're beyond a 6, maybe a 7, I mean, Julie, we've probably had hundreds, if not 1,000 or more lives on Earth. But there's no, I've had clients who come in and they'll say, Linda, I've been told, by whoever, that I've had, well, as you said, Julie, 512 lives. Doesn't matter how many lives you've had. It matters what happened in your lives.
Oh, good point. Good point. So what happens in that? Did your soul progress, or are you still kind of stuck on autoplay and you just keep repeating the same things, perhaps in different incarnations, same script, different set of circumstances or variables?
Totally. It's funny. Often as I talk like this and answer questions, then client stories pop into my mind. And I'll just say this briefly, but I recently was working with a client in a past life. And and to be honest, I find the work fascinating. But this woman that I was working with went to a past life, oh my gosh, probably thousands of years ago. And she had leprosy, as some people had. That's of course a real disease.
Yeah.
So she to not give on and on and on all the details of the regression, but so in the beginning of the past life, she found herself, and let me just say, people probably know regression means the client is telling me the details. I'm not giving the details to the client. So
right.
She was a woman, actually a woman about age 30, in a cave with a man, also young, fairly young adult man. They both had leprosy, and she could describe what they were wearing. She could describe the cave. But what we might call the presenting issue, or one of the presenting issues in her session was, she said, Linda, I've been very spiritual for years and years and years. But even though I'm very spiritual, I'm afraid of dying. And she said, it's never made sense to me why I'm afraid of dying. Well, long story short, she died in this cave with leprosy because there was a major storm and the cave filled with water and mud. And she died in the cave because of the storm. And, it wasn't, what I know a lot about dying only because my clients die in sessions all the time,
right,
in their past lives. And, once your soul has left your body, it's just like most of the time, from breath to calmness. But at any rate, her fear was because of how she had died in that past life. And that felt very much a relief to know where that came from.
So it sounds like it was kind of a combination of being buried alive and drowning at the same time almost.
Yeah. And, people listening, they might go, oh, Linda, why did you tell that story? That sounds awful. Because she needed to know what the trigger was. Obviously, that life was over a long time ago. She needed to know what the trigger for her fear was. And again, I know that when we pass, no matter what causes our passing, whether it's old age and we just go to bed and go to sleep, or a disease or, natural disaster of some sort, still, when breath is gone, our soul is out of the body and there's usually tranquility.
Yeah, instantly. I agree, because I work with a lot of people with that too. Couple of questions about that. When you illuminate, she, with your help, illuminated that dying in the cave when she was, let's say, drowned or buried alive or whatever, did that release the fear of death for her? Or did it take several other sessions exploring other past lives to explore perhaps that script that maybe had transpired in multiple lifetimes in different scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question. What her guide said, so this type of regression, as I said a few minutes ago, this type of regression that I guide means we go through a past life, we go to the final scene of the past life, and then we follow that natural, what I'll call return journey, as that slice of the client's soul resided within that past life body. That slice of soul basically moves from third dimension, from 3D, and returns back to where the remainder, called our higher self, resides. And so when I do this type of regression, then the client experiences their own higher self, their own soul energy, and almost always at least one, if not more than one, guide shows up. The guide said, and kind of in response to your question, Julie, the guide said to the client, you've had more than one life where you died in a complicated sort of surprising way, where something happened and that you didn't expect. But the guide said, we really feel that this one life will sort of be the key in the lock and will release that trauma that you've been carrying that you didn't understand.
Mm-hmm. I don't do past life regressions with my clients. I do what I call a past life scan. They're not hypnotized, but I'm led by spirit to go to the lifetime that correlates the most with whatever it is they want to discover, which is what you're saying. And it's so fascinating. I agree with you, Linda, on the past lives are one of the most fun things I get to do. Because I always say, you can't make this stuff up that they get. And then I get too, because we can corroborate it with historic documentation normally online that's available. And I'm not that creative. You may be, but my guess is you're not either.
No.
It's just, I just think, what? And the first time I was exposed to past lives was, God, probably, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago on Oprah, back when we had VCR tapes.
Yeah.
I would tape her show and then I'd watch it at night after work.
Yes.
And she had a little boy on who was in the Civil War. And he was 3. He couldn't even read yet. This kid couldn't read yet. And so he was talking about where his regiment was, who his commanding officer was, what his dog tag numbers were, all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, what? And in everything that he talked about, Linda, was able to be corroborated with historic documentation.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'll just say, and I'll make this story fairly brief because I think I can make it brief. The way I fell into this work, which relates to what you just said, Julie, the way I fell into this work is about 30 years ago. This is the way I always tell it. I was minding my own business. I was a psychologist in general, conventional private practice. I didn't even know if I believed in reincarnation. I had a very dear and close colleague pass. I was in my 40s. He was in his 30s. It was very sad, at least from a human standpoint, that he passed from a type of cancer. When he passed, he started talking to me from the other side, which was completely new to me. And when he passed, he started showing me in my mind's eye scenes of past lives he and I had shared. Well, it felt real, but those were new, certainly from a conscious standpoint, those were new experiences. So I said to my husband knew this was the colleague, the person that died was a colleague of mine. My husband knew that colleague. And my husband and I had already been married, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years at the time. And so I said to my husband, here's what I'm experiencing. Don't you think that's weird and crazy? And here's my husband's response, which surprised me, again, because we'd been together a long time already. So my husband said, I think I blocked something out from my childhood. And I said, what do you mean? And my husband said, well, only now, my husband was in his 40s at the time as well. Only now do I remember that when I was a boy growing up, in my private time and space outside, sort of in the countryside, when I was alone, my husband said, I remembered my past lives in detail. I knew they were my lives. I knew they were, I knew the details were valid. But my husband said, nobody ever talked about that in my world. So I just tucked it all away and forgot. So again, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, I never expected that to happen.
Well, and it's fun to hear that story with your husband because you both have your doctorates, for heaven's sakes. I mean, you guys are well educated in all these scientific principles and things, and now you're talking about past lives, which to a lot of your colleagues probably would just seem like it was almost blasphemous to discuss that, within the context of being a professional psychologist.
Well, that was, you're talking about the challenge I went through for maybe a couple of years after the event I just shared of, I'm fascinated. I have to learn more about this. I want to do this. I'm sure my guides were hanging out sort of saying, go for it, Linda, go, be brave, be brave. And I worried. Back then, most of my referrals came from medical doctors.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I couldn't help myself. I know today, because that's a long time ago. I know today I was meant to go in the direction I went. But Julie, I had those feelings you just described. It's like people are going to think, Dr. Linda Backman's wacky.
Right. Well, so what you did was you polished your golden ovaries and got the courage to do something with it. That's what I always say about me too, because I'm a businesswoman. I thought people are going to think I'm nuts.
Exactly.
And so, guys have brass balls, girls have golden ovaries. So you got your golden ovaries engaged there.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Let's go back for a minute. You mentioned initially that we're required to learn lessons. Who requires us to learn anything? We're required by whom?
The way I would put that, and, I can give you a lot more specific now, what I know now about the higher realm and guides and spiritual realm and who and all that. So the higher realm, the spiritual realm, is coordinated by highly advanced souls. And, people can call that God if they want, source, great spirit. They can use their own terminology. But it is basically, it is the nature of what a soul is. A soul is not created, with perfection and, or, as perfect. And so think about a newborn infant. I think we can make the analogy of, I have children, I have grandchildren. Think about a newborn infant. That newborn infant, you can't, take that newborn infant and, lay them down on the floor of the grocery store and say, now go buy groceries. We teach, we teach our children all kinds of things from zero. And then, it's time to go to kindergarten. We don't usually just have a kindergartner get on a bus. We usually walk the child into the classroom and we pick them up from the classroom. Well, a soul's like that too. Souls, when souls are created, there's a place in the spiritual realm that my mentor discovered, and I have revalidated it with clients. There's a place called the soul nursery. And in that soul nursery, it's almost like, think about marsupials. Out comes that immature baby, that marsupial baby, that has to climb into mama's pouch. And again, everybody, we need mamas and daddies. So I'm not just implying we only need women as mamas, but that marsupial is prepared to manage outside the pouch by being in the pouch. So souls are prepared in the same way, and we grow step by step by step. And that's the way the universe works. Again, I don't give the information to the clients. They give the information to me.
And you see many similarities, probably thousands of clients that are telling you the same thing, certainly with their flavor on whatever they're telling you, but it's all basically the same information that you're gleaning from listening to all these thousands of clients over the years. Yeah, I get the same thing.
That's partly why it fascinates me. It's like, oh my gosh, I sort of heard a similar explanation about how do we plan our lives, for instance. Well, and of course I learned things from my mentor who's on the other side now, but that's a long time ago. But I've worked with multiple clients a week, most weeks, for about 28 or 29 years. And I'm just fascinated when something I really believed I already knew, through regression, it's revalidated by this week's client. So it must be valid. So, I'll add in a piece. I'll kind of stretch us along here. Let me see how to say this so it's clear. All souls are not designed to incarnate on earth. There are some souls that are conceived, created, intended to incarnate somewhere other than earth. And so I've uncovered the learning that there are 3 types of souls that can come to earth, but only 2 of those types come to earth infrequently.
Okay, that's a tease. You got to finish that. What are the types of souls? And I'll tell you why I'm so interested in this, because, well, I'll tell you up front, a couple of, 3 weeks ago, maybe, I was regressed for the first time. I'd never been hypnotized in my whole life.
Okay.
All 65 years of it.
Wow.
And we went to find out where my healing interest and abilities began. And it began in some star 500 billion light years away. And I'm going, what? And so, okay, so you piqued my interest here. What kind of souls come to earth? And it doesn't sound like they're all just in a galaxy far, far away and that's their whole existence. It sounds like, certainly that's what we got from my regression. I was in a galaxy far, far away, and now I'm on Earth. So do you see that as well? Okay, walk us through that.
Yeah, okay, let me, and I'll walk you through that and try not to make it too complicated. Okay, I think the first piece, and I always want people to try to grasp this, so let me try to make it as black and white as I can. When souls first began to incarnate on Earth, obviously, I think everybody knows, this is a planet. The planets are created. I am not a physicist, but planets are created, and they are normally initially too hot for life to exist, and they have to cool. So Earth was created, billions of years ago. It had to cool. Once it cooled, we began to have plant life and what is called single-celled aquatic life. No upright beings with intelligent soul incarnation. But when intelligent soul incarnation began, the original souls, and it was a conglomerate group. It was a what I call a conglomerate soul group. A large group of souls were. I'm going to tell you what I know, and then occasionally, and even my guides tell me this at times, they'll occasionally say, Linda, that answer is above your pay grade. That's how they put it.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
But bottom line, a group of souls of higher wisdom determined it was time for intelligent incarnation to happen on Earth, and a conglomerate group of souls that came from somewhere, of course, other than Earth, like a star, a planet, an interdimensional space, likely and almost for sure, based on what I know, from inside of what we call the solar system we live in. The original souls that came to Earth came from outside of Earth to incarnate. And then many of them, probably the bulk of them, stayed and continued to incarnate over and over and over, sort of ad nauseum, on Earth. So that's the original soul group. But as I guide clients, and I learned this through my clients, in today's era, today's time on Earth, current chronology, there are souls that come to Earth that don't often come to Earth, and they come from other planets, other stars. There truly are UFOs. They have shown up many times in my regressions with incredible detail about the workings of the inside of the spacecraft. And so there are what I call, this is the term that was given to me, interplanetary souls. Now, everybody listening, you can exchange that with ET souls means the same, starseed means the same. So there are souls at times that come to Earth to aid humanity's evolution. They don't regularly come to Earth. The only reason they come to Earth is they come from advanced cultures in the universe. They come from more advanced cultures than our human culture.
Right.
And then lastly, and I'll just say this, and I can expand on it if you want, there's a third type of soul that at times comes to Earth. It comes to Earth, and that's an angelic soul. That's a soul that comes from the angelic realm that supports Source or works directly with Source and the archangels. And those at times are my clients, angelic realm souls. They're fascinating people.
I agree. We had Rachel Campos on the show recently, who claims to be one of those angels that has incarnated this round. And it's fascinating to listen to her talk about everything. And we had her channel the angels on the show, and it was just spot on. And I thought, even the best actresses on the planet, I'm not sure could speak in such an easy, free-flowing manner at such a high vibration that I was able to resonate with like she did.
Yeah.
So it's gotten a lot of controversial comments from people about, well, you can't be an angel and blah, 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 blah. So it's really interesting that you're saying this and that you've experienced this with other clients.
And I don't go looking for clients that I think are angelic souls. They show up in my practice. And then I learn a lot about what's an angelic soul like, what are their gifts, what are their skills, why do they come to Earth, what are their challenges, what do they struggle with by coming to Earth. And both interplanetary souls and angelic realm souls have some both physical, emotional, spiritual struggles, often more than earth-based souls do.
Why do you think that is?
Easy answer, to be honest. Because angelic souls, what I call angelic realm souls and interplanetary souls, they don't have a lot of experience in these bodies, these human bodies on this planet. And so they might be, especially interplanetary souls, they might be diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. They might have sizable allergies. They might, and under, as people listen, underscore the word might, not for sure. It's not going to, they're not going to have this whole, check, 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 check. They might have autoimmune disorders because they're not used to both our environment and our physicality.
Well, that makes total sense. All right. I want to talk about your mentors because they are the pioneers of this whole niche. So I want to get to that in a minute. But first, let's back up a couple of spaces. You talk about that you can communicate with your guides and other spirits. Did you grow up having dead people chase you as a child, or do you come from a spiritual family? How did that come about?
Yeah, that again is a great question. Well, I often say, Julie, and I say this to my clients, I say, and this is really true, when clients come to me, they come in two possible flavors is how I put it. So flavor X is the client that comes to me and says, Linda, when I was 5 years old, my deceased grandmother that everybody talked about, but I never met, from the time I was 5 years old until I was 18 years old or whatever, that deceased grandmother periodically showed up in my bedroom at night to give me advice. And so flavor X of the two types of clients that I end up working with, flavor X is that person that sort of what you said, Julie, that they're people who as young people, I mean, maybe teenagers, or they knew they had spiritual experiences. Flavor Y is Linda. And these are many of my clients as well. Flavor Y is falling into the awareness or coming upon the awareness of soul, reincarnation, what happens when we die, where's my best friend that passed when, she was 23 or whatever. I'm flavor Y. I didn't fall into this until I was 46 years old.
Well, and obviously with your doctorate, you're research-based. So for you to get that degree, you had to write a dissertation and you had to be able to prove all your hypotheses and all of that. So I would imagine that you as flavor Y, all of that was training to help you get into this. And then you were led to where that validation and that research was basically proving that what those different people were telling you was true. And there's lots of it out there, but people just don't know about it.
Correct. And you're totally right. I asked my guides at one point, it's like, so why did I have to be 46 years old to get into what I've now done for basically 30 years? And they said pretty much what you said. No, Linda, we wanted you, so people will think you're credible because you're a psychologist. But it's some of the fascinating pieces. I'll just share this briefly. When I was getting my master's degree and then my doctoral degree, one of my key area of focus in my research was gender differences and looking at why we don't have more gender equality on this planet, or why do we make such an issue about, well, men should behave this way and women, blah, blah, blah. That was my research from a very black and white grounded perspective. But at this stage of my spiritual work, I know that one of my responsibilities as a soul and a soul and body on earth is to help obliterate, that's how I'd like to put it, to help obliterate these assumptions we make about, oh, where you're too soft because you're a man, or you're too assertive because you're a woman. It's like to get rid of those biases.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the interesting thing about as children, many people are able to communicate with spirit. That's what prompted my children's series of books, because I've had so many moms and grandmothers over the years, Linda, come to me and say, can you help me explain how little Tommy, talks to his deceased great-grandmother who was dead 80 years before he was born?
Exactly.
And can you explain how my child knows things from past lives that we can corroborate with historical documentation available online? And lastly, my favorite is when we tell little Susie, who's 3, well, grandma's in heaven now, and you can talk to her and all of that. Little Susie's going, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box up in the front of the room because they're at the funeral home for the visitation.
Right.
And so it's been my experience, and so my belief, that we all come in with the ability, and little children don't know any differently until somebody in their lives says, oh, honey, that's just your imagination. That's not really real. Or they have a friend that says, man, you are just weird. There is nobody else standing here with us. What are you thinking? Have you experienced that as well?
Oh, yeah. Or the opposite, because I have sometimes I started doing interviews of clients long before I got into spirituality. I love to do interviews because as I'm doing an interview before I guide regression, I'm getting hits. You probably do the same, Julie. It's like, and I zip it up. I don't, because I want the regression to be neat and clean, but I'm getting hits as I'm listening to the client. So at times clients will say to me, Linda, when I was 13, 14, 15, my mother or my father or my aunt or my uncle or whoever handed me a book about Edgar Cayce's channeling. And I read about Edgar Cayce when I was 14 years old. And that fascinates me. I mean, my mother didn't know who Edgar Cayce was. But we either foster it and support it, or we put the child down and then their interest goes underground. Or with my husband's story, no one made fun of him because he never said a word because he thought nobody would understand.
Right. Well, and it's very rare at this point that I have people give me a hard time about this stuff. I just say, if you don't want to talk about it, great. What do you want to talk about? Football, the weather, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't need to convince anybody.
Sure.
But every once in a while, somebody will want to have a conversation about it. And they'll say, now, I don't believe that you can talk to spirits. And I'll say, well, do you pray? And I'll say, well, of course I pray. And I'll say, great. To whom are you praying? Jesus, God, whoever. And I'll say, great. Do you get answers? Yeah, I do. Okay. Well, does that mean that Jesus is sitting next to you on the couch having a conversation with you? And they'll say, well, no, of course not. And I'll say, oh, you're talking with Jesus' spirit. And their eyes get wide and they get it right away. I said, you're talking to a spirit and you're getting communication telepathically from a spirit. We do it all day long. We're just not aware of it because we're not taught about it. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree with that. It's like people will say, well, I got a hit or I received a sign. It's like, well, where do you think that came from? And, and I'll say to people, the hits and signs either come from your own soul, your higher self, because our higher self is always one of our guides, or the sign comes from a guide that is not your own soul. And whether we want to say that guide is God or Jesus or Buddha or Susie Q, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I believe that we're all spirit. We're all a fractal of the divine, and the divine source spirit, whatever you want to call it, communicates through us or with us through maybe a deceased loved one or a spirit guide, because it's more fathomable to us in our human minds that we're talking to someone instead of God or, source or something like that. So it's been my experience, and I'd love to hear your take on this, that spirit's going to communicate to us in a way that we can understand it and grasp it from our own human perspective, and what our own perspective is based on what we've experienced so far in our lifetimes. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, that makes sense. And because of my years of regression, and because a couple of people in my personal life are very capable channels, so I sort of have both going on in my life. I can get information. So I might do a regression session, find out something fascinating, and then go and check it out with one or the other of these people that I trust, that I can ask questions to, and I get information back.
Right.
And so I've learned a lot, both from clients and capable channeling, about what is our higher self doing? What is our soul doing when we're in body? How is the spiritual realm coordinated? There is coordination at the higher realm with guides and that sort of thing. And I've learned this partly because I'm fascinated, but also more importantly, because as humans at times we're affected by activities at the soul level.
Say more about that.
Just to give an example. I mean, there's a lot of things I could share, but let me give an example. And I've sometimes spirit, my guides, my soul pushes me through an experience, something I need to experience so I can understand it and I can talk about it with clients.
Right. I agree.
So, it's like the female OBGYN that's had babies. She knows what it's like to birth a baby. So they push me through experiences. So as an example, sometimes I'll go through a day, 3 days, 4 days, maybe as much as 5 or 6 days of feeling really agitated, having a lot of sleep disturbance, just energetically affected. It took me quite a long time to figure out what was going on. But so I go through a period of daytime agitation and nighttime agitation. And it just kind of pops up out of nowhere. And then it will calm down. But because either I can talk to my own guides, or I've learned how to talk to my guides and my higher self, and I can ask questions to a couple of people that are capable channels. What I know is that at times, we as souls in body, we as humans, I like to call it an upgrade, just like we upgrade a program on our computer. We're upgraded energetically, we're upgraded in order to take on greater responsibility on the planet. That greater responsibility, it doesn't have to be somebody like you or me, Julie, necessarily, that's out there with a public persona and, doing things publicly or speaking or writing or whatever. It could be someone who's about to take care of an ill family member, and they need to make the decision to maybe cut back on their, paid work or type of work, and have the gift of walking the journey with an ill family member. We might be upgraded to do that, but we are at times. And we always, as a soul, at the soul level, agree to the upgrade. It's not forced on us.
So the upgrade is not part of our soul's path when we incarnate. Rather, it comes in perhaps midlife, kind of as an upgrade. Or do you think it's all part of the master plan, and then it's a fork in the road, and the upgrade is, okay, I'm going to go right instead of left? Is that part of the free will thing?
I think it's yes and yes. I suspect, I'm almost sure about this, that my guides and probably my agreement before I was born as Linda was I was going to have this opportunity to step into unique kind of work, what I do now. But on the other hand, there are times when it's on the fly. It's like, okay, Julie agreed to do a podcast and write a book or whatever it might be. But we want to expand that. We want her to do more. The planet is badly in need of more of what you offer, Julie. And so it's like, we're going to, I call it being pushed through a keyhole. Because when it's going on, it's challenging. It's like, why am I so edgy? Why do I feel so uncomfortable? But what I know, because I've gone through it far more than once, is then it just eases off and it's done. So it's yes and yes.
I live in the deep South, so they would say, now, darling, you're being led. You're being led to do that. That's what they say down here. All right. I want to talk about lives between lives. But first, you, girlfriend, have been educated by two giants in this space, Doctors Michael Newton and Brian Weiss. And they're both pioneers in all of this past life stuff. And they got all that alphabet soup at the end of their names, like you do, with all those fancy degrees and everything.
Yeah.
So please tell us about these extraordinary men, how they impacted your life, and how you even got in touch with them. How were you led to them? How did you get into the space where they could lead you personally, not just by reading their books, but you trained personally underneath these guys?
Yeah, and let me just clarify that. Though I do know Brian Weiss, the bulk of my training was with Dr. Michael Newton, and not primarily. I highly respect Dr. Brian Weiss. Obviously, he's a seminal teacher in the field, but primarily my experience and very deep and personal experience was with Michael Newton.
So tell us about him.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and because I want listeners to think about this, these opportunities, and I'll explain how I connected with Michael Newton, but these opportunities are at times, and probably oftentimes, created at the soul level, and then we as humans decide what to do with them. So what happened? Long story made short, I have this experience, obviously, with my colleague dying. I become fascinated with this type of work with soul and regression and past lives and evolution and all of that. And initially, I got involved. There used to be, the organization has gone by the wayside. There used to be an organization in the United States of regression therapists. And I became involved with that initially and took training with that group. But then, so Dr. Michael Newton, who wrote the original, again, seminal books in what he called Life Between Lives, Spiritual Regression. Michael's first book came out in 1994. I found it in a bookstore. I bought it and read it and decided I needed to find a way to meet Michael Newton. And so I wrote to him through his publisher, which became my publisher when I started writing books. I wrote to Michael, and he said, and I used to tease him about this. Michael was in his late 60s at the time. He'd been doing this work for years, but he'd never written about it until 1994. And he said, "Oh, Linda, this is great. I'm going to train people in my work. Would you come to my first training at this professional conference?" Well, I went to the professional conference, met him in person. He gave a 2-hour talk, which is not training. And I said, after that, he and I chatted, and I said, this training needs to be days in length, not 2 hours. And over time, that is what led Michael to create a full-blown days in length training. And that's how and then I worked closely with Michael. And once I trained, started doing the work, then I ultimately co-taught the work alongside Michael. And so, but I'll say I know that opportunity was handed to me, and I had to decide what to do with it. So that's the way that works at the soul level. Michael was a fascinating person. He was old school. He was very black and white. It's this way, not that way. But he was also very gifted in what he brought to the planet.
You catalyst you to help him create his training. Doesn't the University of Virginia have like a whole department of people that study this stuff, do research on it, and teach that past life stuff?
The famous person you're thinking about is Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was in the Department of Psychiatry at what we call U of VA. I used to live in the South myself. I don't live in the South now, but I have lived in the South. And so Dr. Ian Stevenson was on the faculty, the psychiatric faculty in the med school in Charlottesville at U of VA. And he's the one that started doing the research on children's memories of past lives, children in Pakistan and India, where those lives could be validated through talking to neighbors and saying, oh, yes, there was a woman that died and she had a child and there was a fire and blah, 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 blah. That was Ian Stevenson. And then when Ian Stevenson passed, Dr. Jim Tucker at University of Virginia, took over Stevenson's work. Their work is about children's spontaneous past life memories.
Well, and Dr. Weiss, too, didn't his story begin when he's a psychiatrist, correct? And didn't he have clients or patients for him as an MD? He had patients that came in and he was doing therapy with them, and all these past life stories started coming out, and he was going, what is this? And it led him down his path. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, he was, as is the case for a lot of psychiatrists, and especially older psychiatrists, hypnosis training. I don't know if it still is, but hypnosis training used to be an automatic part of med school for psychiatrists. So yes, Brian Weiss was using hypnosis to help his clients with current life problems. And spontaneously, he had clients start telling him about past lives.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Talk to us about lives between lives. Is that between lifetimes and we're in heaven? I'm using air quotes, and we're kind of going, okay, well, that was interesting what I experienced in that life. So maybe next time, let's tweak it a little, and I'll be born here with these parents and blah, 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 blah. And we come up with our next incarnation's kind of basic roadmap of what we want to explore and experience. What's it mean when you talk about lives between lives?
Yeah, I've said this a zillion times. When Michael Newton created his term, life between lives, spiritual regression, that was Michael's term. It's a little bit of a confusing term, and I still use it slightly. I call that type of regression that I do between lives soul regression. It's a misnomer, and here's why. So the regression that Michael Newton created, and even though I've tweaked it a bit because I studied with Michael over 20 years ago, it really means that the client in regression is going to experience their soul level. They're going to connect with their higher self. And between lives simply means connecting with our soul energy. Maybe here's a better way of explaining it. When we're incarnate, we bring, think about a pie, an old-fashioned pie. When we get ready to be born, we bring a holographic slice of our soul energy into our body that causes us to live and breathe. The remainder of our soul energy is our higher self that resides, call it heaven, call it the spiritual realm, call it the celestial realm, that resides at a higher frequency where our guides and loved ones reside. So when Michael used the term between lives, he really meant soul level. We're going to work at your soul level. When I guide that kind of regression, and also when Michael did too, then in a between lives, what I call between lives soul regression, the guide of the client will bring forward benevolent information for the client that the guide feels the client needs to move forward in their current life. It might be about past life. It might be about the purpose of current life, how we planned our current life, who are souls we've known before. And so why do we have these relationships with souls we've known before? A major part of the type of regression that I guide, that Newton guided, is soul level. And at our soul level, what needs to come forward in the regression comes forward spontaneously. And I have clients bring personal questions to the session. Why have I had this health problem? What does that mean? I've always wanted to become a musician, but I've been an accountant for 25 years. What do I do about that? Why did I decide to come into body? Where do I come from? Why do I, for interplanetary souls, often interplanetary souls will say, why does the night sky fascinate me so much? Why do I wish I was out there versus here? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, back to my episode a couple weeks ago when I was regressed, and, I brought a question to the table and I said, where does my interest in healing originate? Because I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world and a former manufacturer. And 9 companies I founded from scratch, half of them were in the medical industry, not as a provider, but giving providers what they needed to help. And then I get into all this energy healing stuff. And so that was a question that I brought to the table where it made sense to me. And I would imagine this is what you explore with your clients is, okay, well, that makes total sense. If I've had all these past lives when I'm doing healing stuff, and in this lifetime, I've explored healing from a multitude of ways in different companies that I've founded. And now I'm doing this woo-woo stuff. That's the most fun thing with healing I've ever done.
Right.
So yeah, it's fascinating how we can explore all these things. Back to the past life thing. What's the bottom line here for your clients when they know what their past life has been? Do you see that it relieves emotional trauma? Does it help them heal from a medical condition? Do you find that it's an instantaneous kind of a solution that's presented? Does it require multiple sessions that can unfold over days, weeks, months, even years? What are you seeing?
Boy, I mean, that again is a question with lots of different answers. For some clients, they discover something that happened in a past life, and the symptom, the worry, the fear, the obsession, whatever it might be, is just gone. Because it's not just regression is not just a left-brained tool. It's an energetic and a right-brained tool. So it serves, it serves our consciousness. It serves us at the soul level as well as at the everyday human left brain level. For some clients, it gives them an explanation of, let's just say, their fear. And then the fear may not fully go away, but when it arises, they understand it, and then they cope with it rather than putting themselves down for, oh, what's wrong with me? And, why can't I stop having this reaction, blah, blah, blah. So it varies a lot. Quite often, I work with clients one time and one time only, and they gain what they need, and I don't work with them again. But that's not to say that I don't have clients that I've done repetitive regressions with. So it really varies. It depends on the issue. It depends on what's their path in this life, what is their own soul and their guide calling them to do in life today and how to move forward with that. So, a quick example. Here's one that I remember from a client I worked with last week. She discovered a great deal about who she is as a soul, why she's in body, what her life purpose and intentions are. And she found that very useful. A few days later, she wrote to me and she said, Linda, I've, since the regression, and she said, thank you. There was a lot of fascinating and important information, but I have felt like I've had a mild case of the flu ever since the regression. Linda, do you see that? What does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, yes, I think now you're going through a cleansing. Now you're going through a release of energy and memories and challenges that you knew nothing about. And now your body and your soul are doing a bunch of letting go. I mean, we often, illness, especially sort of minor illness like a cold or mild symptoms of a flu, is a cleansing to release. And she wrote back to me and she said, somebody else told me that very same thing. So I'm pretty sure you're probably right.
Yeah. Great analogy. A couple more questions for you as we're winding down here. More than 25 years ago, you founded Ravenheart, a mystery school for advancement of the soul. What a great descriptor there. Kudos on that one. Tell us about it. Please tell us about it.
Well, so maybe a lot of people know this, and I'll tell you about that in two ways. In ancient times, particularly in ancient Egypt, there were mystery schools. People can track this on the internet. There were mystery schools, thousands of years ago in various places in the world, including ancient Egypt. And I'll just insert a quick comment. Egypt is one of the 3 oldest civilizations on the planet, and it's the most advanced civilization. And it is a place where I co-led a spiritual journey with a group this year with an Egyptologist colleague of mine, and we'll be doing that again in 2025. But so these mystery schools, they go back thousands of years. These were teachers and groups of people learning about the soul, working on understanding the soul. So that's where the term mystery school comes from. Where the term Ravenheart Center comes from, when my colleague passed, I'm glad you asked me this. Sometimes it's kind of an interesting story. When my colleague passed, and he's talking to me from the other side, and I know it's him, but it's surprising to me. Where we were living at the time, I needed to go find somebody who channeled. I needed to find a person who would help me verify or, invalidate what I was receiving from my colleague. And one of the things that my colleague was telling me is there was something metal that he wanted me to retrieve. There was something metal he wanted me to have. So I found a person who channeled in my community, and I scheduled an appointment, and maybe a week later I went to see her, and she began to channel. And the thing about the metal item is that I needed to get the key to our joint office space back from the wife of my colleague. So that's the thing about metal. But then the woman who channeled said, Linda, your colleague is going to show up as a raven. Your colleague is going to show up in odd ways in your life as a raven. And I'm sure people know that indigenous culture believes that animals serve as signs and guides and that sort of thing. Well, sure enough, I mean, I had a lot of different experiences after that with a raven, but one of the kind of surprising and very kind of strong and overt examples was a few months later, I was leading a spiritual workshop for some women at my home on a Saturday. And before the workshop started, this particular morning, one of the women that was coming to the workshop called me. And she lived kind of away from outside the community in a rural area. And she said, Linda, you're going to find this the weirdest request. She didn't know anything about the raven for me. She said, I woke up this morning, I walked out on my front porch, and there was a wounded raven on my front porch. And she said, so I gently picked up the raven, put it in like a cat carrier cage thing. And she said, I'm going to feed it. And I think if I leave it by itself all day, it might die. And she said, I know this is crazy, but could I bring the raven in the cage to the workshop?
Wow.
And I said, you absolutely can bring that raven. We need the raven. So anyway, the raven was quiet, but sat off in the corner in my house where I was teaching the workshop. So, yeah.
Wow. And what do you do at Ravenheart?
Well, Ravenheart Center is simply the name of the work that I do and also the work that my husband does. And so Ravenheart Center is the name of our business, if you will, where I guide regression, I train people. At times we take groups, places, I teach courses. My husband is a very capable channel, and he does private channeling sessions. So the Ravenheart Center is the name of our work.
Okay, and that's where you do your training too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Last question. Why do we incarnate?
As we've talked about, to grow and evolve, to gain greater wisdom and understanding, and come from more healthy perspectives, whether it's humility, whether it's supporting others, where we learn to not come from our sort of what we might call an ego perspective. We come from how do we aid others? How do we aid humanity? So it's how we evolve as a soul.
Great answer. Wow. You are just extraordinary. You are fabulous. What just beacon of wisdom you are. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for helping educate the world and helping people really understand a little bit more about this spirituality thing, that it's much bigger than what we've all been taught, certainly in religions and through other cultures that maybe we've learned about in school. How can people learn more about you and your work?
So people can find me on my website. And as we just kind of talked about, it is the name of my work. So it's all run together, ravenheartcenter.com. So everything is there on my website.
All right. And we'll have that in all the show notes as well. So it will make it easy for people to find you. All righty, everybody. That's it for today. My gosh, lots to unpack, lots of food for thought for all of us. Sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from Colorado, too, where Linda is. We'll see you next time. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.